guest of the evening is a true trailblazer in the world of responsible investing. We'll get into why she even has a nickname. She is very well known for this. But please join me in welcoming to the stage Carlyle Global Head of Corporate Affairs, Meg Starr. Hi. Thank you for being here. So I teased it a little bit, but I like that we're ending with you because we heard all of the great work that Ryan and Corley and Mame are doing, and you've figured out a way to kind of put financial data behind it. Talk to us about that. Well, first of all, and you earned a nickname for it.
Uh-oh.
What do they call you? The Green Star?
The Green Star.
Okay. Talk to us about
actually
this.
my mom's literal last name, so it's like in the family.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So it fits. But talk to us about this because few investors are interested in putting money towards good without knowing that it will also drive profit. So talk to us about how you came up with this database.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Nice to see everybody. So what Eleanor is talking about is this project that was kind of a pipe dream, I would say, 5 years ago in the depths of COVID. I work at Carlyle, a large global investment firm, and I was running sustainability, and we were just dying under the weight of requests for sustainability questions and data that just like were this cacophony and didn't tell us anything because they all had slightly different wording and slightly different calculations across thousands of metrics. And so we got in a room and we just did some hard negotiating with some of the big capital allocators in the US, CalPERS, CalSTRS, internationally, APG, PGGM. And we said, it's not that crazy of an idea, but what if we all got in a room and we just decided on what data we would measure from an ESG perspective, and then how we would tie that with operational and financial data so we could actually get something that works. And so the simple idea kicked off in 2021. We had a small group of private equity GPs that say we get it across our companies. That first year we got data from 2,000 private companies. We had around 100 private equity GPs participate, and we just closed the books on 2024 data. We have 9,000 private companies reporting quantitative, comparable ESG data tied with performance data across about 320 private equity firms, which just like gives us actual data about what is working, how does it work, and in what instances.
Okay, so what does the data say? Is ESG actually good for business?
I would just say that it really is nuanced, like everything in life. And like using the word ESG, it's like, why are we even talking about that at this point? We found three main things. The first is that the performance is really mixed between privately held companies and publicly held companies. Privately held companies do a better job on things like decarbonization and frankly job growth. They drive a lot more job growth. Publicly held companies are better on diversity. They're better on renewable energy purchasing. The second thing we found, which is really interesting, is that the private equity ownership model actually drives faster change. If you look at the data set between 2023 and 2024 on decarbonization, take Scope 1 emissions, public companies over that 1 year period reduce Scope 1 emissions about 0.4%. Private equity companies reduce them about 2.3%, 5x increase. Actually, same thing for Scope 2 emissions. Publicly held companies reduce them around 1%, privately held companies around 5.4%. And so there's something about that ownership model where if you get into it, you can drive change. And then the most important part, the last point, is that we're actually seeing ESG performance levers really being tied to financial performance. And that's kind of the holy grail that we've all been waiting for.
What do you attribute that to? Like, what are you measuring exactly?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. Like, the reason I say why are we even talking about ESG? It's just like it's become so unhelpful. Like what we're actually talking about, that's an umbrella term of very specific underlying levers, some of which drive financial performance, some of which don't. So like, let's talk about each one individually. A metric that was added in recent years was around employee engagement and satisfaction. How bought in are your companies? How do they feel, are your employees? How do they feel taken care of? Unsurprisingly, companies with really high employee satisfaction scores have about half the costs of turnover of other businesses.
Right.
You're not paying to recruit and train and onboard new companies. Companies with higher employee engagement scores also have about 7% higher revenue growth than companies with. So it's very specific metrics like that, and you can go through decarbonization. There's a lot of interesting data around workforce injuries, a lot of data around diversity, but each one has specific levers to EBITDA that may or may not exist. And like, that's our job as sustainability professionals, is not to say this is all sunshine and rainbows and will make your company better. Like, really specifically where and how, so you can prioritize those investment dollars.
Can we drill down on the diversity findings?
Yeah.
What have you seen there? What have you noticed? Any trends?
Yeah, so what we've seen is that for diversity, particularly companies with more diverse boards, it's hard to measure diversity globally because there's a lot of regulations around what you can and can't ask, how you define things. So gender diversity tends to be the best data that we have, but pretty clear data that companies with more gender diverse boards and C-suites have faster revenue growth, and there are some correlations there around ideation, business development, creativity.
So let's talk a little bit about ESG and like how, because while you oversee corporate affairs, comms falls under that umbrella, yes. Right? So how do you all talk about ESG, sustainability, governance, diversity? What words do you use? What words should people use? What lands when you're talking to CEOs or investors?
We joke about this sometimes, where there's so much disagreement and arguing around vocabulary right now that is like so fundamentally useless. When you get down to like, what are we actually talking about? Like 95% of the time you agree. If you asked, two investors, one from a red state, one from a blue state, like, do you want your investment manager in your portfolio of coastal real estate to be thinking about hardening assets, making sure that you have great insurance policies, making sure they're really understanding floodplain risk? Like 95%, if not more, of investors would say like, yes, I hope my manager thinks about that. If you ask those same people, do you want your investment manager thinking about climate change? A lot now would say no. And so like, we don't need to use unhelpful terminology if that's just gonna create confusion. And so I think really getting down into the specifics, our team kind of tongue-in-cheek named our sustainability report 2 years ago when this was really coming to a furor. We kind of jokingly named our sustainability report the EBITDA of ESG, and it stuck for us. It's like, we literally, if you talk about some element of environmental, social, governance issues, you have to talk about the EBITDA lever. Is that driving revenue? Is that cutting costs? Is that helping with financing?
But what you're talking about are actually like nuanced conversation, or in really detailed, I would say, conversation.
Yeah. It's not great for Axios headlines.
It's not great, but it's also not great for social media. It's not great for TikTok. It's not great for tweets. It's not great for maybe some political activists who want to attack companies. So what sort of conversations should these companies have if they are under attack for these ESG strategies that are good for their business?
Yeah. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. There's a lot of discourse, particularly in the US, particularly in the media, around kind of the anti-ESG movement. What we've actually seen across, as an investment manager, our core stakeholders, our investors, the vast majority of our investors want more, better, faster on sustainability, but there's a higher risk of talking about it externally. And so I think a lot of folks are just walking that line right now where, do we need to be talking about it externally if it's creating confusion, if you only get a soundbite out, if there's only a headline? Like, the harder, more useful conversations can take an hour and a half in a room talking about the climate resilience of your physical infrastructure portfolio. And so I think it's walking the line of like, who are your core demographics and how do you reach them? Like, it's probably not in a newspaper headline, sadly.
It's not X.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I do want to talk about something that is pretty social media friendly, which is a new partnership that you all have with F1.
Yes.
Seeing Carlyle show up there is interesting, to say the least. So talk to us about that decision. Like, why are you showing up there? Who are you trying to reach? What is the goal?
Yeah. So Carlyle signed a partnership with Oracle Red Bull Racing 2 weeks ago, and then we won the last 2 weekends in a row. So I think a real lucky charm. Might be Max Verstappen, might be us. I think this really gets to the trend of the democratization of private markets and opening the access. And everyone in this room has heard about that and is thinking about that. But private markets historically have really been only privy for large institutional investors that have the benefit of massive staffs and the ability to diligence and underwrite and invest in these assets. And we're really seeing that access start to open up to more everyday investors. There are a lot of caveats with how you do that well, how you do that carefully, how you pay a tremendous amount of attention to liquidity and risk. But as we see this opportunity set opening up, it's interesting from the perspective of a firm that historically our way of talking to investors was in a room having the hour and a
Yeah.
half detailed conversation,
Yeah.
and now you have to reach a much bigger audience. And so F1 is a massive sport democratizing access to that, and the characteristics of speed, precision, performance, we just really gelled with that team. And so together we're really focused on this idea of how are we expanding access to our respective industries, and it's been a really fun partnership so far.
So what's next? Like, what else should we expect from Carlyle when it comes to reaching the everyday investor?
I think what's next is this idea that kind of permeates what we're talking about with sustainability, with this whole idea of democratization, opening access. It's really important to be careful and to be precise and to do it the right way, not necessarily the fast way. And so I think we've been focused on that as we continue to grow.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.